In this video, let us now look at how we can evaluate I raised to power n. The GMAT 41 brings you the Marcus I raised to power n evaluation formula. But before we go into this formula, I'd like to quickly let us know about this. I raised to power n can produce 4 in 2 values only. What do I mean by 4 in 2 values? Yeah, there are generally 2 possible values that I raised to power n can give you. But that 2 possible values can be broken down into 4. The 2 possible values are 1 or I. Whenever you see I raised to any power, it is either you get 1 or you get what? I. As to whether it is plus 1 or minus 1, plus I or minus I, depends on the power n. So you see that this is a 4 in 2 values. The 2 values are 1 and I. But the 4 values now are plus 1 minus 1, plus I minus I. Let us now look at the Marcus I raised to power n evaluation formula. Are we ready? So we have this. The first one is this formula. I raised to power n is equal to get a value I squared in bracket raised to power n over 2 on the condition that the power n is what? Even. So once you are given a problem to evaluate I raised to any power and that power n is an even number, quickly use this formula. I squared in bracket raised to power n over 2. Now you will be sure that the answer is either plus 1 or minus 1 because n is even. It means that whenever n is even, you are expecting to get plus 1 or what? Minus 1. The question now is, how would you know, even without solving to the end, that the result is plus 1 or minus 1? In the case where n is even, using this Marcus I raised to power n evaluation formula. Let us say that here. I raised to power n would give you plus 1 if this n over 2 is an even number. Does that make sense? But then, if n over 2 is an odd number, then we expect that I raised to power n will give us minus 1. Look at that. But take note, n on its own from the given question must be what? An even number. Alright, let us look at the Marcus I raised to power n evaluation formula, case 2, in a situation where n is what? An odd number. So imagine you're given I raised to power n and n is an odd number. Think about I raised to power 25. Alright, so what formula do you need quickly to evaluate I raised to power n that is equal to I, open bracket, I squared, close bracket, raised to power n minus 1 divided by 2. So this is the formula you can apply. And you'll be sure that your final result is either plus I or minus I. Now, whether it is going to be plus I or minus I depends on this power n minus 1 all over 2. Already we know that for n being an odd number, our answer is going to be plus or minus I. Now, is it plus I? Is it minus I? It depends on n minus 1 all over 2 using the Marcus I raised to power n evaluation formula. So look at this. You would get I raised to power n to be equal to plus I if this power n minus 1 all over 2 is an even number. But if on the other hand n minus 1 divided by 2 is an odd number, then you expect that I raised to power n will be equal to minus I. Take note, in this case, n on its own is already an odd number, or even a prime number. Is that okay? Fine. Take note of this point here. Minus 1 raised to an even power will give you plus 1. The minus will disappear. It happens for all negative numbers raised to an even power. Is that okay? The result will give you a positive result. But then minus 1 raised to an odd power, the result will still maintain minus there. Is that okay? In our consideration using Omaka's I raised power n evaluation formula, please take note of this. N is a positive integer in all cases. That is when you can use this formula. So the question now could be, what if you are given I raised to a negative power, let's say minus 6, I raised power minus 6, so n there is minus 6. To apply the Omaka's I raised power n evaluation formula, please apply negative index order of indices. That I raised power minus n, change it to 1 over I raised power n. Then solve the I raised power n using this formula. You get your result. The next video we're going to pick questions and see how we apply the Omaka's I raised power n evaluation formula. Let us now have fun time with these questions on the board, right? We have to evaluate I raised power 500, I raised power 91, I raised power 4, and I raised power 3. So you're going to follow along as I solve this question here on the board, after which you test your ZPD by evaluating I raised power 625 and I raised power 1026. Solving this problem is really interesting, so let's see how it goes. The first question, we have to evaluate I raised to power 500. Now, notice that n is equal to 500 and this is even. It's an even number, is that also? Being that the power n is an even number, we're going to use Omaka's I raised power n equal to I squared raised to power n over 2 formula. And what is the formula? So let us recall it. That's the formula there. So this simply means that I raised power 500 will now be equal to I raised power n, I raised power 500 will be equal to I squared. And what is our I squared? Let's put it in and see. Then raised to power n over 2. N is 500, so it's going to be 500 divided by 2. This is going to be I squared raised to power 500 divided by 2 will give us what? 250. So this is what we're going to get. Therefore, what's the answer to this question? Therefore, I 500 is equal to, all we need to do is to come to this and check the power. Remember that this power 250 is n over 2, is that not so? This n over 2 is an even number. N over 2, which is equal to 250, is even. Therefore, I raised to power 5 will give us plus 1. So this is the answer. If you want to verify, you can verify from here. Simply fix I squared is minus 1. So you have minus 1 raised to power 250. Is that okay? Minus 1 raised to power 250, because we know that I squared is minus 1. So put in minus 1 here, raised to power 250. 250 is an even power. So minus 1 raised to an even power will give you positive 1. I told you in the previous video. Therefore, I raised to power 500 is equal to positive 1. We'll go for a short break. When we're back from the short break, we'll solve the second part of the question. You are welcome from the short break. It is now time I want to look at the second part of the question, number 2. We have to evaluate I raised to power 91. Take note that the power n is equal to 91 and this is odd number. Is that okay? So what do? Use Omaka's I raised power n equal to I bracket I squared raised power n minus 1 divided by what? 2. So we're going to use this formula. Is that okay? Then with the formula, what do? It implies that I raised power 91 will be equal to, you pull out I, open bracket, I squared, raised to power n minus 1 over 2. N there is 91 minus 1 divided by 2. This will be equal to I squared raised to power 91 minus 1 will give us 90. 90 divided by 2 is 45. So do you notice that the power, let's indicate that n minus 1 all over 2 from our analysis here is equal to 45. Look at it, the power. Alright, using the Omarker's I raised to power n evaluation formula when n is odd number. Notice that n minus 1 all over 2 is equal to 45, which is odd. Odd. So what does that mean? Therefore, I raised to power 91 is equal to, take note that whenever n, the power of I, is an odd number, you expect to get either plus or minus I. Now, whether it is plus I or minus I depends on this power based on what I explained earlier. In this case, the power is what? Odd. So it's going to be minus I. If this power was even, it could have been plus I. But in this case, the power here we got is 45. So our result will be minus I. Once again, you can find out, all you need to do here is this. Fix in minus 1 for I squared. Minus 1 raised to power 45. 45 is an odd power. So you still get minus 1 as a result. That minus 1 from I squared raised to power 45, you get minus 1 times I will give you what? Minus I. So instead of imputing the value of I squared, which is minus 1, and then you're thinking these times, just knowing the conditions for the power n minus 1 over 2 or n over 2 for the case of odd or even respectively, you can tell your final value of I raised to any power without stress. Let's go for a short break. When we come back, we'll round off with question number 3 and 4. You're welcome from the short break as we look at the last two part of this question. I raised to power 4 and I raised to power 3. We're going to evaluate that. I raised to power 4. Take note that n is an even number. Because it's an even number, you know the Omarker's I raised to power n evaluation formula to use. This is going to be I squared raised to power n over 2, where n is what? 4. So it's going to be 4 over 2. That's the formula, you know. I squared in bracket raised to power n over 2. This is going to give us I squared raised to power what? 2. Now we're going to notice that the power here is an even power. Look at the outside power. So let me write, notice that n over 2 is equal to 2, and this is what? Even. Therefore, I raised to power 4 is equal to plus 1. It's equal to plus 1, or you can simply say 1. Is that okay? Alright, so we're done with this. The last part of the question, the fourth. We have to evaluate I raised to power 3. 3 is an odd number. So which Omarker's I raised to power n evaluation formula you're going to use? We are going to use the I raised to power n equal to I bracket I squared close bracket raised to power n minus 1 all over what? 2. Therefore, this is going to give us I open bracket I squared raised to power 3 minus 1 over 2, which is equivalent to I bracket I squared raised to power, this is 2 over 2, and 2 over 2 will give you 1. 2 over 2 will give you what? 1. Alright? 2 over 2 will give you 1. Now notice that the power n minus 1 all over 2 is equal to what? 1. And 1 is an odd number. I hope you know that, right? 1 is an odd number. Therefore, I raised to power 3 is equal to minus I. You recall, n here is already an odd number, so our I raised to power n, which is raised to power 3, will definitely be I. So whether it is plus I or minus I depends on this part. This part gives us odd, so it is minus what? I. This is how simple we handle this problem. In the next video, we're going to still pick 2 more questions to solve. and then just see how it goes, alright? We have the second question here on the board, okay? So, when we are done with this question, you have to test the ZPD by solving I raised power 16 and I raised power 1031. So let us do this and see. The first part of the question, I70. You see, the power here, n, is 70 and it is an even number. This simply tells me that I raised power 70 is either plus 1 or minus 1. But I don't know whether it is plus 1 or minus 1. So I'm going to find that out. And how do I determine whether it is plus 1 or minus 1? Simply divide 70 by 2. Remember, n over 2, if n is an even number. Now, if you divide that 70 over 2, and it gives you even number, it means that I raised power 70 will be plus 1. But if it gives us odd number, it means that I raised power 70 is minus 1. Clearly, this is minus 1, you know, because 70 divided by 2 is 35. So the power n over 2 will be 35, which means it is odd. I raised power 70 will be minus 1. So let's just solve that. This is going to be I squared raised to power n over 2. And n here is 70 divided by 2. This is equal to I squared raised to power 35. Now notice that n over 2 is equal to 35. That is 70 over 2. It's equal to 70 over 2, and this is 35. Of course, this is an odd number. It's an odd number. Therefore, I raised power 70 is equal to minus 1. You can verify that yourself. You know that I squared is equal to minus 1. So this bracket here is minus 1 raised to power 35. Power 35 is an odd power. Minus 1 raised to an odd power is still minus 1. Let's look at the second part of the question, B part. We have to evaluate I raised to power 1037. 1037, is it an even number or odd number? It's an odd number. The power here, n, is an odd number. So that tells us that I raised to power 1037 is either plus I or minus I. That's going to be the answer. Again, I don't know if it is going to be plus I or minus I. I don't know. So we're going to find out. And how do you find it out? Remember, using the Omakers I raised to power n evaluation formula, once the power of I, which is n, is odd, you are going to use I bracket, I squared, close brackets, raised to power n minus 1 divided by what? 2. That n minus 1 divided by 2 is very, very important. If n minus 1 divided by 2 is an odd number, it means that this is going to be minus I. But if it's n minus 1 divided by 2 is even number, it means that this is going to be what? Plus I. Now, rather than going through all those protocols, I can simply come here. Since this is odd, I will do 1037 minus 1. Get a value, divide it by 2. Check if what I'm going to get will be even or odd. Then make my conclusion. Don't worry, when we are done with this question, we are going to give a formal conclusion to the Omakers I raised power n evaluation formula. That's going to come out in the next video. Let's solve this and see. This is equal to I bracket I squared raised to power 1037 minus 1 divided by what? 2. And this will be I bracket I squared closed. This will give us 1036. 1036 divided by 2. If you solve out this, you get I bracket I squared. 1036 divided by 2 should give us 2 into 10 is 5. 2 into 3 will give us 1 remainder 1. Attach the 1 to this 6, you get 16. 2 into 16 will give us 8. 518 is an even power, is that not so? So notice that n minus 1 divided by 2, which is equal to 1037 minus 1 divided by 2, gave us 518. This is an even power. Our problem is solved. Therefore, I raised to power 1037 is equal to, this even power, so it's going to be plus I. Plus I. So this is my answer. Good. So in the next video, I'm going to give a summary as a formal conclusion to what you should know about the Omakers I raised to power n evaluation formula. With that principle, We don't even really need to go through all this stress even.